Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mastering the Business of Yoga. I am really excited and grateful that you're joining me for today's episode of the show. And today on the podcast, I'm joined by Lisa Haggis. She is a service-based entrepreneur who helps businesses create one-of-a-kind, high-visibility impact and earning potential. She has 18 years of experience in marketing and business strategy. She's committed to cracking the code on what makes a business innately interesting and worth mentioning. And she's also the founder of Realize Your Brand, a high-touch business consultancy, and the creator of the Substantial Branding Method, which is an approach that transforms your growing business into the legacy-level brand that you uniquely are meant to create. So I am super excited to dive in. I love talking about branding. Branding is one of my favorite, topics around marketing. I know we've covered branding on the podcast before, but I just feel like there's so many different approaches to branding. And I'm really excited to dive in with Lisa to talk about her approach and learn more about her method and her specialty. So Lisa, welcome to the show today. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm so excited to be here and talk about this with you.
Yeah. And I know you're joining me from Ottawa, Canada. So excited to have a fellow Canadian here. Can we start by backing up and hearing a little bit about your story, how you got into everything that you do?
Yeah. So my background, is business. I got a business degree and I came out of university and entered kind of the world of marketing, website, kind of project management. And what happened early in my career is I was helping a lot of small businesses get their websites up, put some messaging out there, run promotional campaigns. And as I was doing that, I was encountering a lot of businesses who didn't really have the raw materials needed to create great marketing content. And when I say raw materials, what I'm talking about is the brand. They didn't have unique positioning. They didn't have messaging or like a heart to what they did. And so it didn't take me long to realize I was way more excited about helping them come up with that, foundational piece. And so I kind of moved myself over into the realm of brand strategy. And now I've launched, a consulting business. I've been in business for 10 years now, helping small businesses create that essential piece where they make all of those decisions up front about who they are and the kind of business they're creating so that their marketing can be a lot more easeful and honest because there's actually something really special about how their business is created.
Yes, I 100% agree with that. And thank you for sharing all of that. And I think this is one thing that, when I entered the world of yoga, I came from a background in business. I was really curious and kind of surprised by the mentality around business. And I think it comes from, there are sectors of business that can feel a little bit dishonest and a little bit like salesy. And I think yoga teachers and yoga studio owners are not trying to be that way. Yet we do need to do marketing. We do need to do sales. And I think a big piece of that is having a brand, because what are you supposed to market if you don't really know what you're actually, marketing to people or selling to people? So I'm curious from your perspective, why is branding something that's important, and particularly from the perspective of small business owners and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I love it. You've really kind of led me into it, because to me, why I think small businesses need to consider branding a critical piece is because I see branding as your path to really showing up authentically. And like you said, a lot of times, and I see this a lot with yoga businesses, there is a bit of an aversion to marketing, to putting yourself out there, or to even really identifying yourself as a business owner or an entrepreneur. And it's because of those kind of older stories that you don't get to be yourself, that you don't get to, allow all of yourself, like your full heart into your work. And to me, I actually like the kind of secondary piece of my story is that I fell in love with the idea of personal branding for exactly that reason, because I saw it as the way to really just be honest about who I am, like all of me in my career, and build my business or even just a career in a really authentic way without compromising, holding back, or warping myself into who I thought I needed to be.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really good point there that I think sometimes people feel like they should be doing things, or they need to be somebody, or they need to appear a certain way. And particularly when I think about this, I think about social media. And in the yoga world, it's like, and I felt this when I first started out too, like, oh, I can't do a lot of advanced fancy poses. What am I supposed to post on Instagram? And it took me a while to realize, that's not my brand. That's not who I am. And so posting that would be completely unauthentic to how I teach, what I offer, et cetera, et cetera. And yet kind of coming around to, okay, there are people who are interested in something other than just like a pretty photo of something that looks fancy. Can we talk a little bit more about that? Because I think there is a lot of people who maybe struggle with like this discovery piece of what their brand is, and kind of getting away from like maybe what you think you should be doing, or what you're seeing other people doing, and kind of, figure out who you are and what your brand is.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I love what you just shared, like looking at others and kind of forming the expectations that you place on yourself based on how others are showing up is a real problem. And I think probably one of the best ways to kind of stall yourself out or hold yourself back in business, because like everything that you need to build your brand is within you or within your ideal students/clients. It is none of it's within your competitors. So looking at them like is completely a detour that you just don't need. And so let's start with looking at you. We all have, kind of these innate gifts and talents, like you could call it a zone of genius, like Gay Hendricks. We have this element that we thrive and shine in, and every yoga teacher is different. Every yoga teacher has a different zone of genius. And if you kind of use that as your starting point, then, you can kind of stem every other decision you make can be built around that, and also built around your unique values, which aren't the same as any other yoga teacher out there. And then based on those, you can kind of start to find your ideal client. And then you get to learn about them and what they need. And that gives you everything you need to build your brand. You don't need anything from like alternative options out there in the industry.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like for me, that just makes it feel like kind of a weight off the shoulders a little bit, like, oh, I don't have to be taking on all of this like pressure and, everything that's kind of out there in terms of there's a lot of people trying to teach you how to build your business. And I think, that's you and I included, but I love this mentality of like, you have everything you need for your brand. And it's just about learning like the tools and techniques for actually taking that, packaging that, and putting that out there. And so maybe we can shift into that a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit about your branding methodology to start with?
Yeah. So my methodology is called substantial branding. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But the main is that I think that you have to be really brave and bold with how you show up in the world if you want to have an impact, if you want to be a beacon for the clients that are right for you. And if you're not standing on solid ground with how you've positioned yourself, what you've determined is, the transformation you provide, then you will not be able to do that from an authentic place. And so for me, we all have these kind of, constants within ourselves. Like I brought them up earlier, like our values, our zone of genius, our point of view, our kind of authentic character traits. These are the pieces that you get to, you kind of need to extract first to know that your brand needs to be built from those things, so that it's authentic, you're standing on solid ground, and you'll have that confidence to really go all in with it and put yourself out there. And then the other kind of really key piece, like in my process of trying to crack the code on what makes businesses worth mentioning and interesting, I landed that there are 3 core components to a brand that has that, that X factor that people just fall in love with. And you really do need all 3, but a lot of branding advice that you see out there is really only focusing on one of them. And so, the first thing that you need is meaning. So for yoga teachers, this is most often the easiest to know why you're in it. Like, what is your purpose? What are your values? What's kind of the movement that you're trying to create in the world? But you absolutely need that component, because otherwise people won't feel an emotional connection to your brand. So putting that out there is absolutely key, but it's not enough. And a lot of times people lead with that, but they don't understand why people aren't resonating or buying from them. And it's because they're missing the second piece, which is value. And so you also need a really strong marketing message that speaks directly to your ideal clients or students and tells them, hey, I have what you're looking for. Like, you want a certain transformation, and I'm going to help you create that transformation. And, here's a little bit about how I'm going to help you do it. And I really get you. Like, that's really the key with the value, is like that they feel you get them and that you have what they're looking for. And then you need this final piece, which is originality, where you have a way that you deliver that promise or that transformation that's different than the way that everybody else is helping them achieve what they want. And that's based on how you see things differently, like your unique philosophy and point of view on your industry. And when you bring all 3 of these things together, you will have a brand that is unlike any other yoga teacher or yoga studio out there. And so it's like this multi-dimensional approach that I call substantial branding.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I really love that. And I resonate with so much of what you're talking about, just in terms of, figuring out your own values, who you are, who your ideal client is, and then being able to turn around and put that out there. And one thing I always find really interesting, and I know I just had this situation with a friend I was talking to where, I made a suggestion of, hey, have you tried like putting some flyers up in your community for your classes? She was teaching, classes at the beach or something like that. And she's like, oh, I did try that and it didn't work. And I was like, okay, well, when did you try it, first of all? And she's like, oh, during the pandemic. And I was like, okay, well, I don't think we should just like completely rule it out, because obviously during the pandemic was a pretty intense time. A lot of people weren't out and about. So people who are normally maybe going to coffee shops or community centers or grocery stores are like, not doing those things or getting in and out really quick. They're not stopping to look at flyers. So I was like, I think we could try it again. And then, I was like, who's your ideal client? Where are you putting these? What is your messaging on it? And it was interesting because once we got into talking about that, she was like, oh, okay, I hadn't considered that. So it was kind of like she'd ruled out the idea that like, oh, flyers in my community don't work, instead of thinking about like, are my flyers in the right place where my people are? And do they even have the right like content on them? Like, are they actually attracting the people I want to attract? And so I feel like that to me, I was just thinking about that as you were sharing, because I think that that's kind of like a key piece when people think about branding. Like sometimes they think, oh, social media is not working, email newsletters not working, flyers aren't working, but there's a lot of other things we need to consider. And I feel like that comes back to like, do we understand who we are, what we offer, and who we're offering to?
Yes, exactly. It's so often the message is what's off, not necessarily the medium or the frequency or the where you're showing up. And so yes, like absolutely 100%.
I'm curious if you have, so somebody who's listening is like, okay, great. I understand all of this conceptually. It makes sense. How do we actually sit down and do this as maybe like a new entrepreneur or a small business owner? And I'm obviously a huge fan of, working with somebody like yourself who specializes in this, but say somebody's starting out, they don't have a lot of resources behind them. They have a very small budget and kind of want to DIY it a little bit. Where do you start in terms of kind of piecing this all together?
Yeah. So my, like, it is a little bit of a a Rubik's cube, so
Yeah.
it's not necessarily always going to be the same entry point for every single business owner. But what I find really quite reliable is to start with your point of view. And so for any, like whether you're a new business owner or a seasoned one, I recommend sitting down and really like asking yourself some really powerful questions about what it is that you do. Like, for example, why yoga? And if there's a specific kind of approach to yoga that you teach, like, I don't know, yoga nidra, for example, why yoga nidra? And really, like, one of the questions that I love is like, why does the world need yoga? And why does it need it now more than ever? And when you ask yourself these kinds of questions, you start to build a case for why, this particular, let's say, like tool that you bring into the lives of people is what they need and why it works. And you start to get really potent belief systems. Like some of the clients that I've worked with will kind of unearth things that they believe, like, that suffering is optional, for example, is something that I've heard. That's not one of my clients, but in the yoga space, I've heard that as a point of view, like a perspective that people take a strong stand for. And so when you start to land on your statements like that, like, your body is your most sacred, I don't want to say possession, but you know what I mean? Like these things that you believe strongly to your core about yoga, about health, about wellness, about life. Just get it all out there. And then you can kind of pick and choose a few that you feel you don't hear other people saying, but people need to hear it. And that's how you start to build your platform to say, hey, I'm taking a stand for, the fact that, flex, like I've seen ads around, that stretching doesn't create flexibility. And most of the world thinks stretching creates flexibility. And so it'll get attention. And then you can kind of go in and learn and learn the perspective of that particular yoga teacher and why she has developed a different approach to help improve flexibility, for example. And so that is the hardest part to do on your own, I find, because we often overlook the way we see things differently because, it's just so intimate. We're so used to it. But that, once you've got kind of a few things that you're wanting to take a stand for in your industry, then you can shape some messaging around it and kind of, meet them where they're at and work them back into understanding why they need it your way. And you can build your offerings with those beliefs right in the center so that your offerings are actually really innovative and different too.
Hey there, yoga teacher. Are you somebody who teaches regular yoga classes but doesn't offer a membership? Well, when you start to have a loyal group of students who show up for you week after week, creating a membership is a great way to transition to reliable income that you can count on. You all know that I recommend Offering Tree as your online yoga business one-stop shop, and that's because Offering Tree makes it easy to set up and grow your membership. When you use Offering Tree, you can create memberships that include unique bundles of classes, courses, and on-demand offerings. And you can set up as many memberships as you want. You can charge clients monthly, annually, weekly, or choose your own billing cycle with Offering Tree's membership tools. And if reoccurring payments don't fit, you can also sell packages that can be refilled when needed. This is just one of the perks of using Offering Tree. So even if memberships aren't for you, check them out, see if maybe this might be the right platform for you and your business. It's an easy, all-in-one tool to host your website, schedule classes and private lessons, and of course, sell memberships. And I have a special discount for you. Head on over to offeringtree.com/MBOM for 15% off 1 year of Offering Tree or 50% off the first 3 months. Once again, that's offeringtree.com/MBOM for a special discount on Offering Tree. All right, now back to the episode. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And just on that last point, I'm curious, especially for somebody who's maybe a bit newer, how do you kind of set yourself apart in terms of your branding and your offerings?
Yeah. And so like my go-to is always to say, because a lot of times in the world of branding, you see people setting themselves apart based on personality. And being somebody myself who isn't like a larger than life personality in the world, when I started in business, I really struggled with that. I thought, I'll never stand out. I'll never kind of be able to be seen and heard. And that's kind of what led on my journey to finding methodology to find a better way for businesses to stand out. And that's when I realized like personality gets attention, but having something really substantial and meaningful to say as a brand, that's what really, has longevity, because people will talk about what you talk about. If you're saying interesting things that they haven't, like that they need to hear that they haven't heard before, that's what they're going to say to their friends. They're going to say, oh, like I was listening to one of your interviews with a friend of yours who does yoga for the moon cycle, for example. And like, that is such an interesting, innovative approach to yoga. That's what people are going to talk about. They're going to say, I never heard about doing it this way, but it makes perfect sense to me because of this. They're not going to say, oh, her personality is really, exciting. And so the most important thing you can do to set yourself apart is to really make sure that you stay immersed and passionate and, even a little bit obsessed with your craft of yoga so that you can start to form interesting, perspectives and opinions and like form your own point of view. Because if you're getting distracted thinking that you need to learn marketing and Instagram and all of these other things, what that means is you're staying at the exact same level in your craft and you're not going to find your own way of creating change for people as quickly because you're getting distracted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's a really great piece of advice. So thank you for that. And yeah, I think if there's anyone out there who's listening, who's maybe really new into this, like one thing that I found so helpful for me in the early days of my yoga career was just teaching a lot and trying a lot of different things. And I think sometimes we know what we want to do. Sometimes we know, maybe what we want to specialize in or what makes us unique. But I know from my own experience and then just from teaching in a number of trainings, there's often people who are like, I don't know what I want my brand to be. I don't know what I want my business to be because I've never done this before. And for those people, I think it's, learning this information so you can kind of have it like percolating in the back of your head and then just going out and trying a bunch of stuff. And I feel like that's how you really discover what makes you innately you and what makes you unique from other people, because we all have it. It's just sometimes we don't know what it is right away, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's such a great point. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I do want to kind of take a step back and say something that I should have said, which is you don't actually need to set yourself apart to make money. And so if you are truly, truly in the beginning, I would put most of your focus on the value part of the kind of three areas that I talked about of substantial branding. Like, you can see success if all you're doing is focusing on putting offers out there to people and speaking their language. And the other thing kind of within that same realm is you might not, like, maybe you never find, some revolutionary take on your industry, and that's totally okay. Another way that you can, stand out is to simply be more relevant to your ideal client than other providers are. And so that means being willing to go in tighter on a particular niche after you've done some of that initial experimentation, or even before you have, because something that I don't think is said enough is you can choose a niche just as a business strategy so that you can serve people like in the most tailored, effective way. And you're not married to it for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I really like that. So thanks for sharing that. And yeah, it makes me think of, I have a yoga teacher friend here in Mexico, and she's just about to open a studio, and she teaches lots of different varieties of classes. But one of the things she does specialize in is running prenatal and postnatal classes. And since I just had a baby in February, so I was doing her prenatal classes from, I think, like October till February. So a good like second half of my pregnancy pretty much. And then now I've been doing some of her like postpartum, postnatal classes. And I feel like she's a really interesting example of somebody who has a niche. Like, she's got a really good following of moms and, moms who are pregnant, who are telling their other pregnant friends, but it's not the only thing she teaches. Like, she still teaches other classes. And I think that sometimes when we start talking about niches, people get a little bit scared by, well, I want to still teach Vinyasa Flow, but I also want to do something like serve moms. And I feel like you can kind of have those two parts to you. You can still teach like an all levels class. That's totally fine. By choosing a niche, it doesn't mean like you have to drop all your other classes. It's just having that niche then allows people to know, like, hey, this is the person to go to for this thing. So it's like, I know, if I get pregnant again, or if I have a friend who's pregnant, that I can send them to my friend for her classes, even though she teaches other stuff too.
I love that. Yes, it's like it. Another example that comes to mind for me is like, there's a lot of wellness coaches out in the world, and the truth is they all have the same promise. It's to help you improve your health, right? And there's a lot of yoga teachers out there, and the truth is they all have the same promise. Like, at the end of the day, is to help people either improve their health or, to grow in their spiritual journey. And so it's actually through the smaller promises that you do find a niche, that you do create a niche. And so I call these like supporting promises. Like, when I build out a brand, like, we have to have that big master promise that's like, all right, at the end of the day, we're going to create this huge transformation for you. But I also break it down into what I call supporting promises, which are kind of like those smaller niches that are a lot more concrete, a lot more tangible. And like you could be a yoga studio that also offers nutrition, or you could be a yoga studio that specializes in building a morning practice. I had a client actually who that was one of the things that he put a stake in the ground is like I'm an authority on helping you build a morning sadhana practice. And so these kind of smaller promises within your bigger promise are how you get specific enough that you're referable. And you still have that bigger promise as kind of your ultimate, canvas. And so you can move within that bigger canvas throughout the course of your business and your growth. And you can even shift those smaller supporting promises if you outgrow them. But they absolutely will help you get traction faster if you're willing to get really specific so that you're actually offering up something that people are actively looking for.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love that. And so one of the things I'm curious about, and this is, I think, one of the things I struggled with a little bit in my early days and that I hear from yoga teachers is this idea of we want to be authentic and true to who we are. And we want to be, honest about who we are and kind of sharing that. But we maybe also don't want just our personal life or our personality to kind of be, I guess, the center of the brand. So I'm curious, how your suggestions for how we balance that, how we balance having a brand that's authentic about us, true to who we are, yet not totally about us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple different angles on that. So the more obvious one is, whether or not you want to have a personal brand or you want to have a, I have Realize Your Brand is my agency. It's based on me, but it is its own entity. It has its own life. And obviously, that's one decision that you get to make up front that will help you distance yourself a little bit if that's something that you're looking for. But what I like to say is either way, no matter what business you're building, what you're bringing to the table are the raw materials. And so your values and your beliefs and, your genius, that no matter what needs to be the raw materials that make the brand so that you feel at home in the brand, so that you're not kind of wearing, clothes that don't fit you. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a spokesperson. If you think of brands and this is all with the caveat that I think in the yoga industry, probably more often than not, there is benefit to being your own spokesperson. But I want to say that for brands in general, you can have a little bit more of a collective, if you've got a studio, the studio can speak in a collective we using your beliefs, using your values, using your personality and characteristic, but it's not necessarily that they're seeing your face or you're the one doing the speaking, but it's just that you are the most interesting inspiration or catalyst for an interesting brand because you're human and humans are really interesting. And so you get, you have something your business needs, but you don't have to be the one who is face to face with the public delivering it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that that's a good tip, especially for studio owners, because I think that can be a little bit challenging. And I know this was something that I struggled with, with starting MBOM, for example. It took me a long time to kind of figure out the voice of the brand. Do I post yoga photos of myself? Do I post stock photos? Do I get photo shoots done that are not quite so yoga and more businessy? And, it just took me a while to kind of figure out because I'm mostly a one-woman show. I do have a little bit of help, but it's kind of me that does things. When it's me who does the podcast, if you sign up for coaching, it's me, it's not somebody else. And so it's kind of figuring out that yes, it's my voice. Yes, it's my values. Yes, it's my beliefs. Yes, it's my teachings, obviously influenced from teachings I've learned from other people, but it's not like about me, I guess, if that makes sense. And I feel like it does take a little bit of trial and error sometimes to figure this out. And obviously, if your brand is like, for example, like Amanda Kingsmith Yoga, that's going to be really different than a studio like, you know, Yoga Lotus Studio or something like that, where it's not your name and stuff involved. So I think that is kind of just an interesting thing to consider just based on your wants and how you feel about that.
Yeah. Well, and I do feel like in the yoga industry, there's potentially a higher demand for connection, like true deep connection with another human. And that's why I was saying earlier, like I do feel as though, an impersonal brand is not going to fly. Like you don't necessarily need to be the one connecting, but there needs to be connection, I believe, in this industry for people to really feel seen and heard and like satisfied. And so that's something else that I wanted to share.
Yeah, 100%. And I definitely agree with that. And I think especially after, kind of coming out of the last 2 years where we've been in this sort of like exceptionally strange period of life where for a lot of us, we haven't had a lot of connection. And I know for me, my local yoga studio or my favorite yoga teacher has always been a place of community. And so not having that for a lot of people, I think we're missing that. We're craving that. And I think as a yoga teacher, as a yoga studio owner, we have a lot of opportunity to hold space for that, hold space for people to come and be in community with one another. And I guess you can do what you will with that, whether that's depending on how you want to create your business, create your brand, that might be kind of centered around, sort of who you are, your mission, your values, or maybe feeling like a bigger, more community, I guess, community focused space, depending if you're an independent or a studio. But I think either way, like you said, kind of focusing on like other people and the people that are coming into that space and how you can serve them is a great way to think about that.
Yeah. Like one of the questions that I like to ask is, how do you want to make them feel? And something that I want to offer is like what you said about community had me thinking, it's really critical to understand where your value actually lies, with your community, with your audience. Like perhaps like the community that you've created is why people are there, or perhaps you're making them feel a certain way, like because of the experiences that you've designed for people. And like, so it can be easy to think that, oh, the value I provide is that they're either getting, physically more fit or creating peace of mind, but there's often these kind of like supplementary things that we're doing that are creating value. And it can be really easy to overlook those. And, for some yoga studios or yoga teachers, maybe the way you teach yoga isn't all that different, but maybe you have this gift of creating community, and the kind of, community atmosphere that people get to experience when they're with you is unparalleled and keeps them coming back.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, that really just made me think about my husband had a job in Atlanta, Georgia in like 2015, 2016 for a year. And like I'm from a pretty small town in Alberta. Like I remember when we hit 10,000 people and got a McDonald's, it was like it was like a big thing. The town's much bigger now. I don't know anyone when I go back there and stuff, but it used to be the type of thing where you go anywhere and you see people, that type of vibe. So moving to Atlanta was like a city of 6 million people. I knew not a single soul other than my husband who was, working this job full time. And so I found a yoga studio that was close to my house and I started going, and I ended up making some really good friends there. It was kind of like ended up being like my core group of friends, one of which is still one of my, dearest, bestest girlfriends. And I feel like obviously going and practicing yoga, moving my body, breathing was important to me, but I think there was also, I didn't have friends in this city because didn't grow up there. I didn't have a job at that point working there. So getting to go and be in community with like-minded people and stay after class and talk to these people who I was forming relationships with was really key for me. So it was kind of serving, like you're saying, this other purpose. And I think that this even comes back to like what we were talking about before, is figuring out what you kind of do uniquely. And it might be people like your classes, but maybe it's the fact that like you can hold space for them to build friendships in that space. And I think that that can be a really beautiful thing in terms of what we can do as yoga teachers.
Yes, absolutely. And you have to be able to, see that about yourself, which can often be, again, really difficult. You're too close to who you are sometimes to understand that you have a gift for something that is unique, that isn't the norm. And so, make sure you're asking people what it is that they value most about the services you provide, like what made it special for them. And you can start to hear some of that feedback and then use it to hone and go more all in with those differentiators of your brand.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that just makes me think about my really dear friend who I made there, because I feel like that's one of her gifts. Like she's a really, really talented yoga teacher. And even if she like never said a single word to me out of class, I probably would have still continued going to her classes. But she has since, transitioned out of that yoga studio probably, 4 or 5 years ago. And she's built this like beautiful private practice where she's like booked up. She doesn't even have a website. Like she's completely like this anomaly that's like so different from how I teach yoga teachers how to be successful. But she's this example of like one of her gifts is not only teaching really great classes, but making people feel welcome to the point of like, oh, she leaves the studio and her students want to keep working with her. Like it doesn't matter if they need to drive or pay for one-on-ones. And, she'll still tell me like, oh yeah, I'm like working with this person one-on-one, like back from these studio days. And it's been like 4 or 5 years. And I'm just completely like blown away by the way she's built her business constantly. But I feel like that's one of those examples. And I think if you had asked her, I think she might be more aware of it now, but like 5 years ago, had I asked her, like, do you think this is one of the gifts that kind of sets you apart as a yoga teacher? She probably would have said like, no, I don't think so. Like people come to my classes because I have really good cueing and spend a lot of time on my sequences and make really great playlists, et cetera, et cetera.
What a great example. I see that all of the time. Like, just really like one of the things that I like to say is when you go through the branding process, the first thing that changes is how you see yourself. And then from there, you're on a whole new level when you can really, really see. And you talked about, trying to be as authentic as possible earlier. And like on a more, I guess, like personal level, I've really learned on my journey, like authenticity has layers. And there's an evolution. Like you're never done. You're never done. Like you've never nailed it. Like this is who I am. It's the ultimate truth and it will not change. And so, being willing to kind of look inward and see these parts of yourself and challenge who you thought you were, challenge who you thought you needed to be. Like it is such a core part of the process and a part that I think as a yoga teacher, like it gets to be like really similar to the journey that you're already familiar with of like self-reflection and getting to know yourself on a more intimate level. Like that's branding too.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that you've gone through, your own branding process, your own rebranding of your company. Can you share with us some of maybe the top like business lessons you've learned through your own journey?
Yeah. So number one, like this is my number one hard-earned lesson for myself has been that strategies, like we've been talking about a lot of strategies and they're powerful and they're important. And I've learned that no matter what, my number one business asset is my self-esteem. And so for me, like having my own practice of honoring myself, honoring my rhythms, trusting myself, like having boundaries, like all of the actions that I take every day that are essentially filling up my self-esteem tank are the most important actions for my business success. And I will protect them before anything else. And so like, that's a really strong one. I could talk about that one forever. But like, I suppose on some more practical levels, not that that's not practical, but on a little bit more of okay, I'm a marketing and branding person. What else do I have to talk about? I think the number one thing is to keep it simple. Like there's a lot of advice out there. And if you try to implement all of it, then you're going to be showing up in a really complex way. And the worst thing you can do is confuse people. And so I always say err on the side of simplicity and then grow from there. And so if you just take one thing today from this interview and you implement just that and you let the rest kind of sit and steep, that's going to serve you likely a lot better than trying to implement everything at once, because you're going to be able to stay really clear with how you're showing up. And that's the most important thing. And then the last thing that I'll share is that the shortcut is always connecting directly with other humans. And so if you're in a moment in your business where you feel lost, where people aren't responding to what you're selling, where you're not generating the revenue you need, get off of social media, get away from the books and the webinars and the courses, and start talking to your potential students and communities of clients, because it's the sweaty stuff that you don't want to do that is going to get you the fastest results. And the stuff like building a website or being on social media or, even working on your brand, it's not the right time for that. When you're stuck and your business isn't moving, chances are the thing that you're avoiding the most, which is usually the thing that makes you sweat, which often involves reaching out and asking people to do something with you or for you, that's the action you need to take next.
Amazing. Yeah, I can relate to everything you just shared. So thank you for that. I definitely appreciate you sharing all those learnings. And this has just been a really, really amazing conversation. And I love everything that we've talked about. Lisa, I'm curious if you can share where people can go to learn more about you, find out resources that you have, work with you, if that's something they're interested in, all of that good stuff.
Yes, absolutely. So you can find me at realizeyourbrand.com. And that's my website. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook at Realize Your Brand.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you, Amanda. This has been such a great conversation.
Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.